We're talking to a 54-year-old young man from Canada who has prostate cancer, diagnosed about 3 or 4 years ago. He'll talk about that. Initially treated with the surgery. Now he's dealing with an advanced stage disease. Don, welcome to Mail Care.
It's great to be here, Daryl. Thanks for having me.
Tell us how you got diagnosed.
As you mentioned, I'm 54 years old. About 3.5 years ago, I was a former Canadian Mountie, and I was thinking about retirement. I had broken my ankle quite severely, making an arrest on a young man here locally, and I thought prior to retirement I should go and get all of my health in line. I went and got my regular medical checkups done, including labs, and got home that day about 4 or 5 hours later and checked the portal to see how I was doing with my blood sugars, with my cholesterol, that type of thing. And lo and behold, on the form, it showed that I had a very, very high PSA. And as a person who was in his early 50s, I had no clue what that meant. I went online to research what a high PSA meant. And I learned immediately that I might have some issues with my prostate, including a possible cancer diagnosis. Well, it was on a Friday, so I spent the weekend fretting. But on Monday morning, my doctor called me and said he had a copy of the report as well, and had decided that we should probably get on this right away. Was referred immediately to a urologist, had a digital rectal exam, and immediately said, I can detect something on the right side of your prostate. And fast forward over the next 2 or 3 months, I had a series of scans, including a MRI, CT, bone scan. I had the biopsy done, and it was confirmed within about 2.5, 3 months of the initial PSA reading that I, in fact, had cancer. I had Gleason 3+4, 7, and all the scans showed that most likely it was contained within the prostate. So at that point, it was around Christmas at that point, and my wife and I the homework assignment we were given by my urologist was to decide what I wanted to do for treatment, if I wanted to find out more about taking radiation, hormone therapy, surgery, all of those things.
Let's just sit on that moment for a bit. I mean, it's Christmas time, New Year's, and your doctor's telling you, go home, read about a complex surgery, read about the variety of radiation therapies, read about, as a sidebar, perhaps active surveillance, and half a dozen other things, including all the morbidity stuff, well, urinary incontinence, impotence, all that. That's not what you would expect when you go to a doctor, to be told, you've got to figure this out. How did that make you feel?
It was horrifying, to be honest with you, because my wife is younger than me as well. We're fairly recently married, and our lives were running extremely smoothly, including me thinking about retirement. And so we we did everything we could, because our house is always the where everybody comes for Christmas. It's always a house full. And so we tried to have as normal of a Christmas as possible. But behind the scenes, and what most people didn't know, is that we were spending a lot of time talking about how are we going to manage this, because this isn't just a me thing. And so, yeah, it was terrifying. But I knew my family. I have a family history of cancer. We have a genetic defect called Lynch syndrome, and so I've had two previous cancers in my lifetime, and I just worried a lot about taking this slowly, and also because of COVID-19 restrictions that were happening. So I took that opportunity during the Christmas break to reach out to other people who had, some were my age, some were a little older. You can't find a lot of people around 50 years old with prostate cancer. They exist, but they're not as easy to find. And so I managed to speak with some people to get, ideas why they did radiation, ideas why they chose to have surgery. Active surveillance in my scenario was not really a reasonable thing, because my PSA, I'd had a couple PSA tests during this, like from the initial one to the time of surgery, and it was rising rapidly. So I knew we had to do something quickly. And so my wife and I finally, I think it was the day before the phone call with my urologist, we made the decision together. And that was that I was going to have the surgery. And I knew that if I made the decision, the surgery would be within a couple of weeks.
What does it look like that you and your doctor shared the decision? And I ask because so many people listening to this hear the phrase shared decision making, but don't have a clue whether or not that actually happened for them or not.
Yeah, you know, I can say right from the very beginning, I had had a previous relationship with my urologist. I've unfortunately had kidney stones a few times over the last 10 years. So I've already, like, seeing him was like seeing, I won't say an old friend, but we were definitely acquainted. And so I took a lot of what he said at face value and I trusted him. And he also was going to set me up to travel to where I live. I'm in a bit of a remote area, but I had an opportunity to go to Vancouver to speak to a radiation oncologist. But I had actually, right or wrong, I still stand by my decision. I ended up choosing not to do that and chose to do the surgery based on my relationship with my urologist. And so from there, I had a ton of trust in him. And I still do to this day have a lot of trust in his decisions. And now I do know, and speaking, you know, with several people and even my own experience, a urologist is most likely going to request that surgery is probably an option, their choice of option, because that's what they do. But what complicated things a bit for me as well is that where I live, the only option for surgery I had was an open surgery, which could result in a longer recovery time, maybe some further complications. And because of COVID, to travel somewhere else to do a laparoscopic procedure, robotic procedure it would have been some travel and also the difficulties of traveling when I couldn't have any friends or family come and assist me in the hospital. So we chose to go to a hospital that was 10 minutes down the road from where I live. And yeah, I actually was very comfortable with everything that was being suggested to me. I knew at that exact time when I made the decision that I just wanted the best option to get the cancer out of my body as soon as possible.
Yep.
I was shocked when what I learned at 50 years old about prostate cancer. And I thought to myself, how did I get to be this age and not have a clue about I didn't know what a PSA was. I didn't even know what the prostate did, and which is probably very typical for a man. And so I had decided throughout all this process of doing the education is that I wanted to make sure moving forward that I could be the voice that tries to get that message out. Because if you were to compare a man my age to a woman my age, a woman is probably a lot more educated in their health choices and as far as what they should be looking for cancer, I didn't. And so that's where I did rely and trust my urologist for making that decision for the surgery. And as you said, to me, I wanted the cancer out of my body as quickly as possible, and I felt that the surgery was my best option.
Sure. And you look into the eyes of your wife and your children and your grandchildren, and you say to yourself, you know, what can I do to get the cancer out of their lives too?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
You're not wrong. And so that complicated things a little bit further, especially with the relationship with my spouse, because I knew even as a younger man, and I'm fairly fit, I'm healthy otherwise, that having this surgery is going to complicate things, and whether that's ED, whether that's urinary incontinence, but I that's where I struggled the most was with that conversation. But I was very fortunate right from the minute that I got that reading in the portal that my PSA was high and knew that we were on this path. I've had an incredible support from my spouse right from the very beginning, and so that has helped me get to where I'm at today.
Take us into that day as, you know, as much as you can be comfortable in sharing. You know, 3 or 4 years ago, Lisa and you are sitting, laying, standing, whatever you're doing, and she already knows you have cancer and you're making a choice around that. But now you've got to talk about the possibility and the likelihood of erectile dysfunction, urinary incontinence. What are the sentences that both of you shared with each other?
Well, the number one thing is I worried about our future. I mean, I knew we already had a strong relationship, but I worried about her. I think that's a very common thing in a strong relationship is you worry more about your partner than yourself at times. And the things that she kept saying to me was, "You're no good. Basically, you're no good if you're not here. You're no good to me if you're not here. We will figure this out." And one thing is that the two of us are not afraid to do research and to talk to other people about this scenario. And that's what I was getting at is that in the online communities that I've belonged to over the years, I had people I could speak to, and I knew that there were some options, but also locally where we live, we have a prostate center actually in Victoria, Canada, it's called the Vancouver Island Prostate Center, and they had a nurse who contacted me and shared with me some of the things that I could be doing to try to live a more normal life post-surgery. And that put us both at ease. And I mean, we knew it would never be perfect, but as my wife was saying, and I agree with her wholeheartedly, is I mean, if it was the other way around, it was her, like we're no good to each other if we're not here, and so we would do whatever it took.
Right. But you had a genuine fear that the relationship may split up.
I wouldn't say split up, but I knew that it could very easily complicate things. And like I said, this is my second marriage, and we were fairly newly married and both young. And so those thoughts, looking back on it now, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. But immediately at that point is where you're saying to yourself, I don't want to impact this at all. I don't want to impact our future. I don't want to sit and worry about how she's feeling, or is she not going to share how she's feeling. But that's one thing that I can say is that the two of us with our relationship is it's very open. And she shared with me right from the very beginning how she felt about it. And the message, Daryl, is that she said, we will figure it out.
Cool. How did the kids learn about it?
So at Christmas time, because we had family coming from various parts of Canada, we did take everybody aside and we had basically a family meeting to talk about it. And when the dust settles with all of that, they're saying, Dad, whatever it takes, we know that you know what kind of decision to make. We trust your decision, and whatever it takes for you to still be here. And so obviously they were very upset. They've dealt, unfortunately for my children, they've had to deal with a lot of cancer in their lives, whether it's grandparents and me. It was 3 times that I had cancer by the age of 51 years old. And I think they just continue to have that feeling of, is one of these times is going to be where Dad finally comes to us and says, this one's got me. And so I assured them that I was going to do everything it took to still be here. And I'm here. I'm here right now still.
Great. So 2, 3 years goes by and you're doing quarterly PSA tests, blood draws, etc. You're enjoying your life. You're having wonderful times with your grandkids and such, enjoying the beautiful countryside around, enjoying your life, taking quarterly blood tests, and then slowly seeing the PSA rising. What's that like for you?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
cool.
so I went 2 years with quarterly PSA tests where it was undetectable, felt that I had it beat. And my wife and I, in April of last year, had gone out for dinner. And I think it was probably about 7 p.m. I'd had a PSA test that morning. And my wife says, hey, how was your PSA reading? And I went, oh, you know what? I forgot to look. It got to the point where it became expected that I was good. And I'm like, oh, I forgot to check. So quickly pulled up my phone, went into the portal, and it had risen. And so immediately I started to think, well, when you no longer have a prostate, any small rise within your PSA, it could be explainable, but it's now maybe you need to do some research on this. So I thought, well, maybe we've had a false positive reading of some sort. So we both, spent the rest of that dinner talking about the possibilities, but we didn't want to get too far. So I got retested the next week, and it actually was even higher, even a week later. So immediately I was contacted by my urologist's office because they also saw it, and we got a plan for me to see him. And basically, what he told me at the time was that these were still acceptable levels, but we had to keep an eye on the trend. And so by July of last year, it was still rising, and it was rising quite quickly. And by this past fall, it was at a level where I started to need to look at doing some scans. And where I live, and this is where it can get a little bit complicated. I mean, Canada does have a free healthcare system, but we have some long waits for things. And I ended up having to pay for my own, what's called a PSMA PET scan. I traveled to Vancouver and paid for my own to get done to see if we could try to figure out where this cancer was hiding out. And so I went to Vancouver, and it did not find anything, which in speaking with all of I'd been assigned a radiation oncologist at this point. I've kind of gotten ahead of myself a bit, but really what they thought at that point was it's there, most likely just in the prostate bed somewhere. And there was no sign of anything in the lymph nodes and no signs of any metastases anywhere in the body, which was good, but we got to get on this. So that's where I'm at. It's been so January, February is where we started to formulate the plan, and then mid-March is where I started to take hormone therapy. And basically, what my urologist told me throughout this process when I met with him was that something must have been missed. And so, although the PSA was low, was undetectable, and everything looked good during the surgery, the margins appeared to be good. Something escaped. So we are now in the process where I have started ADT. I'm about in my sixth week of ADT now, and I will have 20 sessions of radiation coming up in June or July.
So let's go back to your doctor telling you something must have escaped. And this is the doctor who performed the surgery on you, correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It is, yeah.
What's going through your head? I mean, if somebody you're arresting during your Mountie days, your police officer days, said to you, "Oh, I don't know where those drugs came from. They must have fallen into my shopping bag." I mean, how does that kind of level of conversation affect you?
Well, what immediately happened to me was I thought, did I do enough post-surgery? Did I do enough research? Did I push enough? Should I have maybe sought a second opinion about where I was at? Would I have benefited from maybe some radiation at the same time? So I started second guessing myself. And because, and I'll be honest with you, when post-surgery, my goal of post-surgery was to recover from ED and recover from urinary incontinence as quickly as possible, get back to living my life as normally as I could, have quarterly PSAs and live my life out the rest merrily, right? So this was like, uh-oh, I wasn't expecting this. This wasn't the plan. And so I wasn't angry with my urologist, but I felt, especially with some of my family history, that perhaps we should have dug a little deeper. And so, but I think as I started to go, I get a year out post surgery, I'm still undetectable, 18 months undetectable, 24 months undetectable. You feel at that time, well, he must have been right. He got everything. Like I said, I'm not angry. Angry is not the term I would use at all. I just maybe wish that I had been a little bit more inquisitive, a little bit more like maybe even at that point talking to more people who had dealt with a recurrence and see if they had any similarities to where I was at. So yeah, that's probably my biggest thing is a bit of regret that I didn't take more steps to figure out what I could have done closer to the surgery date.
And by figuring out what do you imagine you might have done?
Well, looking back on it now, possibly radiation, possibly some ADT, but then it gets complicated, Daryl, in that, and I'm 54 now, but I was 51 at the time, and we do know that the ADT has a shelf life for a lot of people. I hear quite often in the community cancer communities that I'm in that 6, 7 years, and some people start to become castrate resistant to the drugs. So I know, and I do know that my medical team was also had my best interest at heart, saying, you might not need it right now. So why are we going to use this up while you're still in your 50s potentially? So, and then there's the complications of radiation that come taking it so early in your life. So yeah, I can second guess it all I want, but I also believe that we made the best decision possible at the time.
Hmm.
And I'm not, yeah. So now it's one of those things that we've talked about earlier on this. We're going to figure this out. We're going to deal with it now. And so that's why we're where we're at right now.
No, and you illustrate sort of the goal that Mail Care sets for, the tens of thousands of people that go through our support network. You're going to deal with what's on your plate today with the knowledge that we have today in such a way that you're not going to beat yourself over the head with a bat later on, no matter what the outcome is. You know,
Yeah.
s- I mean, because we're not on Star Trek. We don't have, devices that can figure things out. We're still in the upper Middle Ages, on the timeline of medical science, and you just this is where we're at. It sounds like you did do the best that you could at the time, though. The idea that the doctor may or may not have told you everything usually comes into people's heads. But, I mean, I mean, doctors are no different than you and me, except that they went to medical school. What would you tell a newly diagnosed guy today so that in 2024 they can live their life without regret, no matter what choices they have, and just deal with what's on their plate today with the knowledge that we have today?
So, number one thing I would say is you have to stay on top of your medical team and never take what they say as the only option. Canada's a bit trickier for trying to get second opinions, but I would definitely say you have to stay on top of that, but also speak to as many people as possible who have gone through this. And so and I'm one of many people, like people reach out to me all the time to want to know, why did you choose surgery? Why did you choose surgery over radiation as a 51-year-old? So I would say is talk to people, get involved in your treatment options as early as possible, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I got distracted there. My apologies. I thought I had everything turned off. And that if you aren't involved, decisions are going to be made that you may regret down the road. And so in Canada, we have the problems in that you only get one urologist that you're assigned to. You only get one radiation oncologist that you're assigned to. And we have huge waiting lists. And so I know something that we talked about beforehand, Daryl, is that I'm actually traveling to the United States for my radiation treatment because they don't have the capacity right now to do it where I live. So that's something that's coming up, and it does complicate things a bit for me. And so Canada, we have great medical care. There's no question about that, but we have long lines. So, and even where I live here on Vancouver Island, the city of Victoria has fantastic facilities and equipment, and they have a fantastic center for radiation. But I might have to wait a year to get the radiation I need, whereas the planning that my oncologist has for my treatment is that he wants me to start radiation in about 8 weeks from now. And in order for that to happen, I have to go to Bellingham. And fortunately, our provincial government has entered into a contract with them to make that happen. And not everybody is able to do that. I mean, you have to have a Canadian passport to be able to travel down there. You have to have the means to get there. Have to have somebody, in my case, you have to have a companion to go with you. And so there's a lot of people that just can't do that. I can. And so I'm going to make it happen. But as you might be aware, as you can imagine, that complicates things. You're away from family, you're in another country. And so, I'm not, I'm not angry about the scenario. And I feel fortunate that I can go and do this. But that's one of the things about Canada is that, yeah, we don't pay for our healthcare, but man, it could affect, and this is what I was trying to get at, is that right now I could be teetering on metastases, right? So do I want to take that time and trust the Canadian system and wait a year and hope that it doesn't happen during that time? Or do I take the first advantage I have to have the radiation to potentially cure this? And that's possible. And we just don't know. And that's the tricky part about a prostate cancer recurrence is that right now they can't find it. They know it's there because of the PSA rising. It doesn't come up in any scans. And this is very normal for what I'm doing, is that they just decide the best, I guess, bang for their buck, so to speak, is to get the ADT going to try to slow things down and then radiate the area where it most likely is. Like, am I thinking that I'm totally, out of the woods on this? Not at all. But this is the best odds I have. But I can tell you right now, I've done way more research this time around than I did 3 years ago.
Sure. And you've also been involved with Man Up to Cancer, which is, we hope will grow into a partner organization with Male Care. The idea that you have become, I mean, the word advocate and really just doesn't really describe what you do. What value does talking to other people with prostate cancer provide for you?
Well, Daryl, you nailed it. It's become more of a lifestyle for me. It really has. And my wife is accepting of it. There's times where she's like, I think you need to get off your phone. But no, I found Man Up to Cancer as a two-time survivor back in 2020 when it first started. And I at the time thought that it would be a great opportunity to talk to other younger men going through cancer, or maybe I could provide support. And lo and behold, shortly after I joined, I ended up getting diagnosed with prostate cancer. And it really provided an opportunity for me to have those opportunity to reach out to other men that had gone through cancer in their early 50s, prostate cancer in their early 50s. My job is to connect men throughout the cancer. But what it's done for me, just to answer your question, it's actually given me some purpose. And I know that it's every day that I connect people. But I connect them in regions, but I also connect them with cancer types. Sometimes it's the ages they have of a certain cancer, and I can help connect them. And sometimes it's for them just to meet for coffee and to just get to know another guy that's going through cancer. But sometimes it's an opportunity for them to develop a relationship where they can help each other out too, as far as getting advice. But without this, I think I could have been in my head a lot more. So the fact that I can give back, and actually I see the results almost every single day of people, connecting, they send me the photos, brings me an incredible amount of joy. And so I think you get that I'm a big fan of this organization. I'm involved in a couple of others that are very similar, but this is where it all started for me. And so really our message is in any of these online cancer communities is we're trying to connect men so they don't have to go through this alone and that they
Right.
have options to, yeah.
Describe for our audience how talking about cancer with another man helps you to get out of your head.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer your question, I met a man locally here a couple of years ago who's since passed, who was a 31-year-old who had been diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And he tried to find support locally, and the only support he could find was a local support group that was men and women together. And he had gone to this session, spilled his guts, talked openly and honestly. And when the meeting was over, he was asked, politely that we can't have you back unless you change the way you talk. You, you're making people uncomfortable. And this wasn't about being a rude person. This was about him being open about his own personal journey, and the language could come with that. But men supporting men, it's okay maybe to have some of those more edgier conversations. And that's what I get out of this, is that I originally was joining these groups for support myself, but now people are coming to me for that support. And I touched on it earlier. For me, if another 50-year-old man, and it happens all the time, contacts me and says, "Hey, I just got diagnosed with prostate cancer and I'm a young guy and I heard that you have some insight on this." You know what? It makes my day. It really does. And not that they've gotten cancer, obviously, but it makes my day that I had a chance to say, "Hey, you know what? This is what I did and this is why I did it. But hey, would you like to speak to a guy who is 50 years old that chose radiation? Do you want to talk to a guy who chose ADT?" And so I'm able to get those guys off on those different networks. And yeah, I mean, even talking with you about it right now, it brings me a lot of happiness thinking about it, because you're not wrong. Like, living in a world full of cancer every hour of every day it could lead to some problems, right? Mental health problems. But I have enough going on in my life outside of Man Up to Cancer and the other cancer communities that I know that I have to focus on things outside of cancer. But when I'm dialed in and I'm all in. And so I'll give them what I've got when I've got it. And I'll even share with my wife, not the details of who they are, but I'll say, I had another opportunity today to speak with a man and say, "Hey, maybe you might want to think about getting another part of your medical team on this, or this is what I did, or this is what so and so did." So I get it. I just get so much out of it.
Yeah, this is your purpose.
It really has become that. Long term, who knows? Can I do this for another 20, 30 years? I don't know. But right now, this is my world. Being retired and my wife's still working, unfortunately for her, I have, 8, 10 hours a day during the week that in amongst all of my chores here at the house, that I can focus in on that. And so it's giving me, exactly, Daryl, it's giving me some purpose.
The idea that our lives have value to ourselves and others sort of informs itself, dynamically in a way that just jazzes us up to get us up in the morning with a smile on our faces. I think you'll
Yeah,
find that too, if you haven't already. But yeah.
definitely do. And you know what? Also cool, and I'll just get a plug into the Mounties, that
Oh,
it's an
go.
organization of about 25,000 Mounties. And we have a quarterly publication that goes out to everyone. And I reached out last year to them saying, "This is me. I'd love an opportunity to share my story," and they did that, right? So you know what, when you have an opportunity to have that soapbox and share, like my message is quite simple. You need to figure out, especially if there's a family history or if you have symptoms, you got to get checked sooner than I did, you know. And so like I said, that's my purpose.
Don, thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'm sure everyone listening to it got value out of it. And we all wish you well and look forward to more conversations with you and with Man Up to Cancer. For those watching, Man Up, that will put a link to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl.